Happy NFL Day. It is Mile High Sports today. I'm Sean Drotar. That's Nate Lundy. Thank you for joining us today. The NFL gets going
back
today. It is back.
Oh.
And with, of course, a tremendous game that we'll look at a little bit later.
So
you get
much.
the two-time champion Chiefs with the Ravens coming into town, the top two favorites in the AFC. We'll break that down a little bit later. Nate has some best bets for you coming up, so keep an eye out for that.
I've got money on the Oilers.
On the Oilers. Okay,
yeah,
so
I'm
maybe
gonna lose.
maybe as the gambling parlance goes, perhaps fade Nate.
No, actually do what I say, because there's afternoon baseball going on and I've already hit my home run in Matt Wallner. So and that was a plus 380 bet to get things going today. So I'll take it. If that is how the day is going to start, giddy up.
He's rolling. Well, the last time the Denver Broncos beat the Seattle Seahawks, it was the last time that Russell Wilson started for the Seahawks. It's been a little while, 2018, since the Broncos last beat them. But going into this game, Nate, the part that I find fascinating is we look at the way the Broncos offense is going to function. And obviously we know this is, from what Sean Payton's made very clear, this is going to be a run first offense, especially with the rookie quarterback in Bo Nix. You'd like Nix to throw the ball on play action and create a little bit, but by and large, the Sean Payton offense is pretty well scripted, and we know that he talks about the running game being a part of it. Now you have kind of a three-headed running game behind Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Estimé. Samaje Perine, who was a big part of it last year, was let go. He's now with the Chiefs. So when you look at the way these guys break down, Javonte Williams now, hopefully now close to 2 years removed from the devastating knee injury that saw him not tear just his ACL. That was what everyone talked about. He tore 3 of the 4 CLs in his knee. So it was a major, major recovery, something of a medical miracle that he was able to be on the field for as much as he was last year. But he definitely faded late, finished with 3.6 yards per carry on the year, even though he almost got to 1,000 combined total yards with both the running and the ground game.
Right.
Is Williams going to be the featured back with Estimé and McLaughlin filling in, or do you think this is really going to be a three-headed monster for the fantasy types, the nightmare running back by committee?
Well, first of all, if you as a fantasy owner drafted any of the running backs for the Broncos, I feel sorry for you.
You have to say that. You know I got Javonte.
Yeah, I know you do. And I was like, I don't know what Sean's doing. I mean, you were there. You saw it yourself. Until you actually see it in action, I don't think it's possible to be able to know, Sean, exactly who the bell cow is going to be. I think the Broncos would like it to be Javonte Williams because I think that they believe in his abilities. But at the same time, I think Estimé is a guy that can take care of business when they get down to the goal line. So you might see some Javonte Williams between the 20s and then suddenly see something completely different by the time you get inside the red zone. So the way this team is constructed from a rushing standpoint, I don't think anybody outside of Sean Payton can predict exactly what's going to happen, not only this Sunday, but going forward. But I think that it is important for this team and maybe even for Javonte Williams from a mental standpoint. To be tested, right? To be put out there and tested in a way almost where you're pretending the knee injury never happened, right? You just want to put him out there. You don't want to be hesitant in a play call for him. You want to put him out there and see if he can actually do it. And look, one of the things to remember about last year is from a fantasy perspective, we were just joking about those of you that are playing fantasy.
Rub it in.
If you look at last year, the thing that you did as a fantasy owner was you started whatever running back was facing the Seahawks. Their rush defense last year was putrid. It was the second worst in the league. And so I think that not only is it an idea of running the ball to be able to take some pressure off of Bo Nix in his very first game in the NFL in an extremely hostile environment, I think it's also sort of a, hey, this team sucked against the run last year. Let's see if they actually got any better.
Especially when you have 3 guys that can carry it. Obviously, in Williams' case, you look at him between the 20s. And over the course of his career, the goal line numbers haven't been that great, even though Williams is a powerful guy. Some of that's the Broncos' offensive line, and some of that's the fact they're not in position to score all that often in the last few years. But the idea of a guy like Estimé taking off that goal line load is pretty valuable for the Broncos and potentially for Williams. Estimé had 18 rushing touchdowns. That is not, I repeat that, 18 rushing touchdowns last year for Notre Dame, over 1,300 rushing yards. Early in training camp, when Sean Payton was asked about 3 down backs, right? So they're the quote unquote bell cow. He mentioned 2 of them. One was Estimé. The other was Perine. who is no longer on the team. So it's pretty clear that Sean Payton has some big plans for Audric Estimé going forward. And in McLaughlin's case, he certainly continued to carve himself out a larger role. Javonte Williams is a free agent after this season. I don't think the Broncos are giving up on him yet by any stretch, but we know that running backs, by and large, getting the second contract is tough, especially if there's someone behind you who can get the job done. So Williams might very well be running for his next job, if not for the Broncos, because not only do they have Estimé and McLaughlin under contract, but they also picked up Blake Watson, who they signed to a 3-year deal, even though he's on the practice squad. That might be the Broncos running back core in 2025. But if Williams shows he can get the job done, this is a guy that's still 24 years old, Nate. And I think more and more when you're talking about situational football in the NFL and how it runs, much like we talk about receivers with certain roles, I think there are running backs with certain roles. And I think that's a good thing because all three of these guys have different skill sets. But when you're talking about the rest of the game beyond the run, how do they catch? How do they pass block? That's a big part of this too.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely huge. I think the other thing that we need to think about when we talk about Javonte Williams and his future on this team is something that we've talked about as it relates to other players. Please remember that he is not a Sean Payton guy. I just think you have to remember that. I think he's continually shown that he wants to make sure that he's with his guys. Now, that's not to say that Javonte can't be one of his guys. It's not to say that maybe he didn't like him when he looked at him coming out of college,
and
right?
Quinn Miners and obviously we talked about Pat Surtain and his guys, and they got paid, so he's open. So
he's open to it if you can show him. But I think that Javante's got a big thing going for him, and it's what you just said: the fact that he's only 24. I think that helps him immensely because, for the most part, in the National Football League, as we all know, use the young guys, run them into the ground for about 5 years, and then your career is over. And you better hope you get that second contract so that you've got the money in the bank moving forward, or that you've been really smart with your money to start off your career. Because running backs, for the most part, I know that there are exceptions, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, et cetera, Adrian Peterson. But for the most part, it's a position that gets used, abused, and dumped, much like I was in college. And I think that that's a thing to be able to pay attention to with Javonte Williams. Now, if he comes out here and he's cutting and moving and sliding and he's making the first guy miss and all those kinds of things, it's going to be impossible for Sean Payton not to like him. And so I'm hoping that is in fact what we see. And again, the teams last year that were the absolute bottom of the barrel in rush defense were Arizona, Seattle, Denver, and the Giants. Did Seattle get better? Maybe. We'll find out on Sunday afternoon. But if they didn't, we might as well see a healthy dose of all those guys. And I do think it's an RBBC. I think it's a running back by committee. I firmly believe that's what we're going to see out of the Broncos. Do I think that Javonte is going to wind up with more carries than anybody else? Yes. Would it surprise me if Audric Estimé becomes like the Jerome Bettis and he's just down on the goal line?
Touchdown vulture?
Yeah, and he's just stealing touchdowns away. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, that wouldn't shock me either. It wouldn't surprise me if Estimé was the team's leader in touchdowns on the whole. The other part that's interesting is Estimé, I think, is a better pass catcher than he got credit for. Obviously, we know the Sean Payton offense uses the running back. Javonte Williams had quite a few catches, and McLaughlin had a few catches. But the other part of the equation we don't know is when Nix drops back to pass. This is the part in which Pirine was so much better than anybody the Broncos had. McLaughlin obviously has challenges with size. Williams was coming back from the injury. But blitz pickup, a pass protection. These are major parts of the equation. McLaughlin isn't going to get significantly bigger. Can he stick his nose in there? Yeah, he's willing to do so too. And so he can get better. Javonte Williams has always been a willing blocker. Estimé has generally looked pretty good when he's been asked to do it, but he hasn't been asked to do it very often. But as I pointed out,
and he hasn't been asked to do it in a full game.
Right. Sean Payton has indicated he sees him as a 3-down back, so he must like the idea of it. But I think the more versatility you have, and I love the idea, Nate, because now that Michael Burton is on the practice squad as a fullback, and Payton likes using his fullback, he likes having his fullback. What I think we might see here and there is 2 back sets, and maybe those are sets with McLaughlin and Williams, where you have speed and power combination. Maybe that's getting to the goal line, a Williams and Estimé situation where you may use one as a lead blocker, or you may not. But there's deception now because of the different skill sets. It's not as if one guy. Let's look at the Cowboys situation a couple years ago when they had Ezekiel Elliott and then moved on to Tony Pollard. More or less. Pollard didn't have enough power to match Elliott, but they were similar backs. So you ran all the same plays for either guy, which made it easy to move on. In this case, everybody has sort of a different set of skills to a certain extent. And if you're Sean Payton, that means you can get creative and play with that. If you're a defensive coordinator facing the Broncos, it also means you have to be aware of more things you may have to deal with.
And you just outlined exactly why you shouldn't have drafted a single Broncos running back in your fantasy league. Because we don't know what he's going to do. We don't know what Sean Payton's going to do. He may go stacked I formation. I don't know what he's going to do from a running back standpoint and how they're going to utilize Burton or any of these other guys. So we know the running game is important to Sean Payton, and we know it's important to this team. It's important to any team with a rookie quarterback. Period. End of sentence. But how he decides to utilize these guys, we don't know yet. I think we will by the time we get to call it week 4. I think we'll know.
Yeah, I think
by the time we're in the first weekend in October and the Raiders are in town, we will have an idea of sort of where they're leaning and where they're going. And we're also going to have an idea of how Javonte Williams is performing. So, put all of those things together. We have a lot of question marks that are going to get answered on Sunday afternoon. I think we all have what we would like to see. I think most Broncos fans would like to see Javonte Williams look like Javonte Williams, right? The guy that they drafted. I think everybody would like to be able to see that. I think people are intrigued by McLaughlin and Estimé. I think that people have seen some flashes out of Jaleel, and I think they want to see something. But I think if you went out and asked, if you went and were hanging out with our friends at number 38 and you asked a couple of Broncos fans that were just sitting there having a burger and a beer, I think they want to see Javonte Williams come back from that very bad injury and be himself again. Will he? We'll find out.
We've seen Javonte Williams do it too, and that's the other part. McLaughlin, you haven't seen him undertake a full season. You haven't really seen that with the rookie Estimé. The idea of running backs, by the way, being sort of devalued in the league, to get the idea of where the Broncos are. The Broncos on their entire running back room spend $5.42 million on the cap. So just over $5 million on the cap this year. There are 11 teams spending even less. And if you're thinking they're bad, you're mistaken. Cleveland is a playoff contender. Tampa Bay made it last year. The Chiefs are 2-time champions. The Bills are in the mix. The Rams are in the mix. The Cowboys are expected to make the playoffs. Minnesota probably was until J.J. McCarthy got hurt. Seattle spends less, but the Bengals do, the Chargers do, and the Jets do. That's a lot of teams that are basically playoff regulars and expected to be regulars, but it just again shows the challenge of trying to build a running back room with stars. The truth is right now in 2020's NFL football, you build your running back room the way the Broncos have built it. You make it cheap, you make it versatile, and then you hope you can continue to roll that, and maybe next year Blake Watson is next up. But what the Broncos are doing isn't that unusual. And again, even though we don't expect them to make this quantum leap forward in the standings, what they are doing looks more in line with the teams that are regularly successful in today's football.
Yeah.
And that's a good sign for the Broncos.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. As we go through and we get ready for this game on Sunday, let's not forget that there is also a game on Saturday between CU and Nebraska. And I was just talking about our friends at number 38. And so I want to remind you that our crew is down at number 38 for every Buffs game this year. Road games, home games, it doesn't matter. We are there at number 38 with the TVs, the food, the drink specials, and our friends at High Noon. If you weren't there for the Thursday opener against North Dakota State, you missed out because the crowd was having a great time. Plus, the weather was cooperative, so we were out on that giant patio that they have, the biggest patio that you'll find in downtown Denver, being able to enjoy the games. That's what you get at number 38 in Rhino. So you get a chance to go down there. You get the watch parties. You get the sponsorship deals that we've got going on right now with High Noon. There's always great food and great drinks, but they've got the High Noon drinks there for you. They've got the bucket specials there. And one of the cool things that you can do specifically with number 38 for these watch parties with the Buffs, and really for a lot of different opportunities, is they give you the opportunity to have a 38 party pack. All right. So check this out. This is a reserved table for you and 7 folks. So it's a prime viewing spot for up to 8 people. They get you the wings. They get you the curds. They get you 2 pitchers of Mountain Time Lager. They get you a large pizza. And on their website, they actually have like the table layout so you can kind of see what you're doing. And on their website, you can actually book the table. So if you haven't had a chance to come down there and you want to get the whole crew of Buffs fans together, I don't know, maybe you're a Huskers fan and you've got some people you want to bring with you.
Stay at home.
No? Okay. Anyway, I want you to go check it out. You can find it all over our social channels if you want to, but their website is NMBR and then the numbers 38. So number 38, but NMBR 38. Check out their CU Buffs page that they've got. Of course, we are there. We do a pregame podcast live from there as well as a postgame. So come down and join us. Number 38. We will see you on Saturday, late afternoon, early evening as the Buffs get ready to take on the Huskers in Lincoln. That'll be at number 38. Check out all the details online. And if you want to grab some folks and do that party pack, highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah, kickoff's at 5:30. You want to be there earlier for that.
Get there early. Trust
me. It's CU Nebraska.
It was a Thursday night against the Bison, and the place was a great party atmosphere.
Saturday night, Buffs,
everybody
Huskers.
Cheering, having a good time. So come down and join us. And remember, they're a great spot to be able to enjoy any of the games, but in particular, we will be there for all the Buffs games.
Well, you look at the running back situation for the Broncos, and even though we don't know how it'll take shape, we look at it and think there's still promise there.
Yes.
We like the talent that is there. Now it has to manifest itself during the course of the season. But at the tight end position for the Broncos, that's been a zero for a while. For the last couple of years, injuries.
Fat goose egg.
Yeah, it's been ugly. The Broncos fans have been holding their hopes on one Greg Dulcich.
There is a time to get used to the physicality, but Jonah Ellis getting a little dinged up on a play he made to bring up the punt.
3rd and 17. We'll see how conservative the Broncos go as Greg Dulcich makes a man miss. He's out beyond the 30-yard line. And
Dulcich, of course, a former walk-on over at UCLA, a lot of receiving talent, kind of going in that mold. Yep. Not a big blocker, willing blocker, not particularly good. He's out there as a big receiver. But he hasn't been able to stay healthy. Last year, Dulcich only had 3 catches for 25 yards, and I think Broncos fans have really pinned their hopes on it. But I believe, Nate, that the best tight end the Denver Broncos have isn't on their 53, but he is on their roster. That'd be Donald Parham Jr., who played for the Chargers last year. Big-bodied guy. Now, you look at Parham's numbers, 27 catches, 285 yards, and 4 touchdowns last year for the Chargers. You're thinking, well, geez, he didn't even get to 300 yards. I mean, how can that be your best guy, Sean? Because your best guy last year was Adam Troutman, who had 22 catches for 205 yards and 3 touchdowns. And he was your best. And for Troutman, that's probably about where he lives. He's more of a blocking guy. He can catch here and there. That's his job. But while Dulcich has not been able to gain traction, Troutman has taken over as the tight end 1. I think by the very, very canny signing of Parham, I do not think that's going to last very long. I think by the beginning of next month, Parham's probably the starter.
I think the reason that you think Parham is the best tight end on the roster is because all of their tight ends are not good.
That's one of the reasons. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. The Broncos in the offseason, through the draft, however you want to look at it, at this point, did not prioritize the position. It's so painfully obvious that they don't.
Years.
And I'm really trying hard not to disparage Dulcich or Kroll or Parham or Troutman
all 4 guys last year had a total of 37 catches.
Yeah,
total.
So I'm just sort of, like I said, I'm not trying to disparage those guys, but they do not have the answer at tight end on this roster or on the practice squad. They're not going to unless something weird happens. And they will continue to be behind at the tight end position compared to, frankly, the other 31 teams in the NFL. I mean, I could probably sit here and go through some depth charts, and we might be able to find some other teams that are in a similar boat as the Broncos in terms of not having a tight end. But, folks, if you sit back right now, if I gave you the 7 consensus picks to make the playoffs in each conference, every one of those teams likely has a star tight end or at least a very solid tight end on the roster.
The real contenders.
They may not, it may not be somebody that is Kittle or Kelsey or Laporte. I mean, it may not be that level, right? we keep coming back to fantasy, but that's because over the last like 2 weeks, the majority of you have done your drafts. So I know it's top of mind for you. They may not be a tier 1 or a tight end, but they're probably a tier 1 or a tier 2. And there's not a single tight end on the roster for the Broncos that sits arguably in tier 3, let alone tier 4. Right? Unless you are just an absolute orange and blue homer and for some reason put one of these guys on your fantasy roster, chances are the entire tight end roster of the Broncos is still sitting out there on waivers for your league. And it's because they haven't found the answer. But they also didn't make it a priority, which tells me that at least for the expectation from an offensive standpoint in 2024, Sean Payton is not concerned about that position. And I have no other choice but to trust him.
Do you find that strange, though? Because when Peyton's
of course I
offenses
find it
have
strange.
yeah, I mean, in general, but Peyton in particular, because you think about the best years that he had.
Jimmy
with the
Graham,
Saints,
baby.
Right. And the idea of having a tight end has only become more important, as you pointed out. You look at Kelsey and Kittle and Mark Andrews. Guess what? Those are the 3 favorites to go to the Super Bowl on those teams right there. You look at Laporta on the Lions. They were in the NFC Championship.
Dallas Goedert.
Yep.
Who's worn off tread on those tires, but he's still good.
Still good. The Broncos only a few teams actually had fewer catches than the Broncos last year, and most of them didn't go anywhere for tight end. So you're right. Teams that use the tight end obviously have a little more punch in today's NFL. So maybe that's another one of those hints when we talk about the Broncos coming back to this rebuilding period and how this season is going to likely work. That the Broncos can still be headed in the right direction, but not be as impressive and maybe not even match the 8 wins they made last year. In fact, both Nate and I think that they won't. So this is part of it. You have to continue to develop. It looks like the running back room is pretty good. It looks like the running back room is pretty good for 2024 and maybe even for 2025. The tight end room, though, is still entirely up in the air. They brought Troutman back simply because he was the best available choice. Parham Jr., I think, is the best tight end the Broncos have, but we're talking about a guy that was only incrementally better than Troutman, but at least he's consistently proven to be able to do all the things you want a tight end to do. The Broncos are still rebuilding, and this is one of the positions that they simply haven't had the opportunity to fix.
Yeah.
You could have picked Brock Bowers, of course, but you needed a quarterback. You go get Bo Nix, and that was the right choice. I don't have any doubt about that. But yeah, tight end is a problem, and it will limit what Bo Nix can do. Those guys work as security blankets. More and more, they're being used as weapons down the field. And for the Broncos, they simply don't have it. And that makes it easier to defend them. If we stack with the running back conversation, why that running backs need to perform, because when you cover against the Broncos on passing plays, you're just not that concerned about getting burned up by a tight end anywhere down the field. So you don't have to guard as much of the field that way. And that's a problem. So the Broncos have to work around that. And there is, as you pointed out, no fix, zero on this year's roster. Even if Greg Dulcich starts to look like he can take over the role, I don't expect him to look like Andrews or Kittle or Kelsey or anything close to it.
No, not at all. And that's the reason why I say it's like as frustrating as it is for me, because I've been harping on outside of quarterback, 2 things on this team for the last half dozen years, and that's the tight end position and their special teams. And so the tight end position continues to be something that frustrates me. But it's also, like I said, I've got to put some trust in what Peyton and Peyton are doing, because they didn't make it a priority. They drafted a quarterback, which is what they should have done for this team. And they didn't make it a priority. They accepted what they are in the tight end room and at that position on the roster, and they moved ahead. There's a site that I love to use when we're doing fantasy football things like that, but I think this plays into our conversation for just a second. Okay, it's called fantasypros.com. And one of the things that Fantasy Pros does is they have a consensus rankings. They do it by week. They also do the full season, things like that. But what they have is they essentially are a collaboration of all of these different fantasy analysts. I've done it before. Our friend Brad Evans has done it before. And they build the ranks out of everybody's voting.
Right.
Okay. And so it's consensus. The highest ranked tight end is Greg Dulcich at number 35.
Yikes. There's 32 teams in the league last I checked. So
Washington has 2 dudes on the list. Baltimore has 2 dudes on the list. Chicago has 2 dudes on the list before you even get to 1 for Denver.
That is obviously one of the things that the Broncos simply can't fix.
Green Bay's got 2 dudes on the list. Okay?
Yeah.
And Tucker Kraft, which just sounds like, I mean,
Sounds
doesn't
like
he?
a football player for sure.
No, he actually kind of sounds a little bit like an accountant.
What?
Tucker Kraft.
Tucker Kraft? Okay. Hey,
Tucker-
who knows? But,
Tucker Kraft will handle your taxes this year.
Tucker Kraft would be the best tight end on the Denver Broncos if they
So
had
you
him.
just
So
like
they're way behind.
New Orleans has 2 dudes on the list
Yeah.
before you even get to 1. It's like, so my point is that it's a position that they still aren't good at. They still are not in the conversation in the NFL, let alone the AFC West at the tight end position.
Yeah.
Okay. They just aren't. And it's not likely to change anytime soon. And we've accepted that as fans. If they are play calling, though, accordingly, if they are doing formations accordingly, if they either have a blocking tight end in there to help them from a running perspective, or they put a 6th offensive lineman out there and basically dare Seattle, etc., to stop them on the ground, giddy up. I'm all for it. But please tell me that there is a plan in 2025 to fix the damn tight end position, because I'm over it.
Yeah, well, there should be ways to get it handled in the draft potentially, as well as maybe even in free agency, because the Broncos really are, as Nate put it, essentially at rock bottom when it comes to their talent at that position.
Sucks.
And it will be a factor in Bo Nix's rookie season. Want to remind you, of course, you get to hear him here on Wednesdays on Mile High Sports. Dr. Rick Perea yesterday, I had an opportunity to talk with a longtime Denver Bronco, David Bruton, about his career journey as well. Dr. Perea is one of the world's leading performance psychologists right out here in Colorado, and has worked with the Broncos during their Super Bowl season, with the Nuggets, with many, many other NFL teams, and helped them reach the goals that they've wanted to reach from a mental health standpoint. He can also help you, whether you're the parent of a high school athlete, whether you're working in business. There are all sorts of different ways that you can get your checkup from the neck up and find a way to improve your situation, especially from the mental standpoint. So go ahead and check out the website, think1foryou.org. It's think1, the number 4, you.org, and find out more about what Dr. Rick Perea and his staff can do for you. They work in a lot of different ways. It's not only consulting, they work with neurofeedback. They have isolation tanks, a lot of different ways that you can start from the ground up and learn more about how to take control of your mental health, or ways that just kind of help you tweak and make sure that you stay on top of it. All of us can stand to improve a little bit from a better mental health standpoint and a better focus on the things we want to do, whether it's a pro athlete like DeMarcus Ware, or whether it's someone like you and me who just goes to work every day and wants to make sure you're a little bit better, a little bit sharper, a little more focused on the things you want to accomplish. Dr. Rick Perea can help you. You catch him right here on Wellness Wednesdays at Mile High Sports, and on his latest podcast. Like I said, catch the one he did yesterday with David Bruton. Terrific, interesting watch. So check him out at the website, think1foryou.org. That's think1foryou.org, and get your checkup from the neck up from our friend Dr. Rick Perea. Joining us today to talk about a couple of big football games, and we just talked about tight ends at the position there. We have a chance to talk to one that knows a little bit of what he is speaking of, and that is our friend Justin Adams. We're working on getting Justin squared away at the moment, former University of Colorado tight end, and the opportunity to talk to Justin is always fascinating at this position. So we'll work on getting him. But we look at this Broncos-Buffs game on Saturday. We'll do that first because, the Buffs and the Huskers. We'll get to the Broncos and the Seahawks as well. But the Buffs finished their first game with a win over North Dakota State. They get it in fashion that was maybe not exactly what they were hoping for. They definitely wanted a more dominant performance than the one that they got. That's why they scheduled an FCS team, even though a very good one, in North Dakota State. But there were things to take away from it that were positive. The Buffalo's talent, when you're talking about the raw talent, has definitely improved. And while it is not necessarily elite talent across the board, there is elite talent on it. Shadur Sanders is part of that. Travis Hunter is part of that. Jimmy Horn Jr. is part of that. So the offensive ability to be explosive is certainly there, but there are concerns about the running game. The Buffs only got 59 yards in total against North Dakota State, only 35 of it from their running backs, Offerdahl and Hayden. They have to be quite a bit better against the Nebraska team that will be starting a freshman quarterback in Dylan Raiola. But Raiola played very well in their opening win. Now, granted, that was against UTEP, maybe even an easier opponent than North Dakota State. But the Huskers are going to be at home. They certainly have an opportunity to get some revenge from the game last year, in which the Huskers in Folsom were stung a little bit. Matt Rule, I think that's stuck under his craw all year long. So for the Buffaloes, this is a game in which they're going to have a quick start. There's no two ways about it. They have to have a quick start in order to make this work out. Because if they find themselves trailing and they become one-dimensional, that's a real problem. The Buffs are already at the moment more or less one-dimensional. They finished that way. It doesn't appear to be a lot better. The offensive line play was better, but Shedeur Sanders was still pressured about a third of the time, one of the higher rates in week 1 for the teams in FBS. So some of those concerns are there. The other concern, obviously, with clock management, the Buffaloes had a lead late. They could have run the ball 3 straight times, drained North Dakota State at the timeouts, and then they would have punted with roughly about 10 seconds remaining. They didn't do it. And so the question now revolves around Deion Sanders, Pat Shurmur, and Shedeur Sanders. Certainly Hunter and Jimmy Horn. Every time you see Travis Hunter in a game, you think, boy, he really needs to be a cornerback at the pro level. And then you see him receiving it. Well, he really needs to be a wide receiver at that level. Travis Hunter is elite no matter where you put him. And on offense, he's a very difficult cover. And Jimmy Horn actually had more yards, almost 200, would have had 200 if not for a drop that he made on the swing pass in that win. So we know they can be explosive through the air. But the problem is if everybody knows that all you're going to do is throw to move the football, you are predictable. And the Buffaloes at this point are predictable, even if the top end talent is very, very good. When Pat Shurmur replaced Sean Lewis, Lewis always had used the Buffs as a stepping stone. He left his head coaching job at Kent State to take over as the offensive coordinator in the hopes of getting a head coaching job at a larger position, which he did. So everything worked out the way it planned for everybody. But they switched over faster than they wanted to. And then when you talk about the situation with Pat Shurmur taking over, of course, Broncos fans familiar with Pat Shurmur as well. Shurmur has had a mixed level of success in his career. He's been a longtime coach in a lot of different roles. But taking over as the offensive coordinator, the main argument that Deion Sanders made while installing Shurmur was very straightforward. It was that Shurmur and Shedeur Sanders got along. The concern following the win over North Dakota State is even as impressive as the performance was by Sanders. The one interception, a very odd, fluky interception that went out the inside of a guy's thigh that was on the ground, diving opposite of the ball. Those sort of things, you just kind of write it off. And maybe the game wouldn't have been as close had that not been an interception, and who knows. But the concern is that Shurmur is letting Sanders do what he wants to do and not the other way around. Because certainly late in the game, Pat Shurmur knows better. He certainly has been around long enough to know better and that kind of clock management decision. And he didn't do it, or at least the Buffs didn't do it. So what can you glean from that? Either Shedeur Sanders is not doing what Pat Shurmur asked. That's probably not the case. Or Pat Shurmur is basically letting Shedeur be Shedeur, which, okay, that's great. But at what point, and I get it, it's one game. At what point do you start to worry about the Buffaloes when it seems to be the Shedeur Sanders show, goes out there, holds the ball as long as possible, a la Russell Wilson, takes a lot of big hits, a la Russell Wilson, goes for those deep shots down the sideline, a la Russell Wilson, and that ends up being the Buffaloes offense. That's going to be too inconsistent, especially when you get into conference play or you play interconference like you're playing a Big Ten team in Nebraska. So Shurmur is going to have to find a way to work with Sanders and make sure that Shurmur can actually get Sanders to do what he wants at times and not necessarily let Sanders do what he wants. Sanders said there was a cover zero late in the game. He felt that was his words in the post-game press conference was disrespectful to Travis Hunter. So he went over the top and tried to go ahead and finish the game with a dagger there. The problem is I'm not a football coach. But I was sitting up in the press box at Folsom Field. And the time that drive started, I turned to the fellow on my left and I said, Sanders is going to go for the kill shot on this drive. He's going to try to get to 500 yards and get a touchdown and finish the game with a touchdown pass on this drive. I said that before the drive started. That's exactly what happened. So if me, non-football coach, is being able to tell you before the drive even begins what the Buffs are going to do, I guarantee you that football coaches know that. And as talented as they are, the Buffaloes can't continue to just rely on Shedeur Sanders to throw the ball 40 times a game and win. That's not a recipe for success. It won't be a recipe for success in this game. If they can't run the ball and run the ball early, they will lose to Nebraska and it will get possibly very ugly. ESPN analytics have the Buffs at basically a 60-40, a 40% chance of winning that game. That sounds about right to me. I give them a better chance than a lot of people do because of the potential of the explosive offense. But it still has to be a little more diverse. The running game has to be better. Shedeur Sanders had 17 of their rushing yards. That's not sustainable either. He got hurt by the end of the year and completely knocked out. He was playing hurt by the tail end of the year before he got knocked out. This is simply not sustainable. The other part that's interesting about it, and I could be off, But there seems to be a concerted effort. Deion Sanders has talked about it, both with Shedeur and with Travis Hunter and Shiloh Sanders as well. Shiloh's concerns are a little bit different, obviously, when you're talking about his NFL futures. Hunter and Sanders, of course, are obviously going to be first-round selections. But we have a chance to talk to Justin Adams. Justin, a little bit about the concern that I have for the Buffalo's offense coming into this game against Nebraska, in part because, once again, even though Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn, high volume, high talent guys, but they are too predictable. This team only ran for 59 yards. 17 of those were Shedeur Sanders. You can't simply go through the air 40 to 50 times a game and expect to win. Some balance has to be in order, especially on the road in a tough spot like Lincoln, which you've been able to play.
But with the crowd noise as well, you have so many different things that you're going to deal with. And let's look back at last year with the 2 road wins that they did have. They had one against Arizona State, the other against TCU. But you may ask yourself what happened in the other road games. Blowout against Oregon, blowout against Washington State. And then you had the losses in the other games on the road as well. And the number one thing that always travels, that we always know, actually it's 2 things that travels in the game of football: defense and a running game. If you could be able to bring both to the table, they will always be able to help you out. You cannot rely as a team just on your passing game. You can even think of the great passing teams, and they were able to run. And one thing that really hits me is I always think about Texas Tech, for example. No one would ever say that Texas Tech with Mike Leach was one of the best running teams out there, but they were always a team that would be able to run the ball just enough to keep you off balance, even with that air raid attack. That's something that the Buffs have to bring to the table this week in Nebraska. It's going to be loud. It's a night game. And if you're not able to go and run the football, you're going to be in trouble.
At one point in the game against North Dakota State, Justin, the Buffs ran 4 times up the middle, including on 4th down. They ran basically the same play 4 times straight with Dallin Hayden, the transfer out of Ohio State. They couldn't get it, and it seemed to basically scare them away from running the rest of the game. Is it important to invest in this early, or would it be more valuable to try to go to Hunter, to Horn, and to get an early lead? If you were coaching the Buffs in the first period, and you're a guy that played for that team, played in Lincoln, what would you do?
I would throw the ball first. I would have no problem throwing the ball. Here's the thing. You could be the type of team that will open up and say, we're going to throw the ball in order to run. But the personnel that we saw last week doesn't allow you really to run the ball effectively. How many times did we see a tight end? Not many times. Maybe we saw Savell Smalls 3 times in the game. Maybe we saw the other tight end, Sam Hart, once. We didn't see the tight end enough. And through your personnel groupings, it's telling me what your priorities are. Yes, you're going to try to run the ball, but if you bring it a fullback or if you bring it a tight end, even with one running back in the backfield, like allow the guy to run and go and get the football, right? When you have your quarterback under center. So there's certain things that they're not doing. And maybe this is something that just because it's the first game, you're going up against North Dakota State and you want to not show too much against Nebraska, that's understandable. Maybe that's the reason why you didn't run the football. But just in general this week, you better make sure that you run the ball. And I would like to see them run the ball a little bit outside of the tackles because, look, Nebraska has some really big boys up front. And so figure out a way how to get that job done. Get your tight ends involved. And you know what that's going to leave? It's going to leave the wide receivers wide open, some great passing lanes. And it will also help out Shedeur Sanders because he's not taking those extra licks because you're giving the ball to your running back.
Yeah, we didn't see a lot of runs trying to get outside the tackle at all for the Buffaloes. That was interesting. And for the first time in their entire history, they started their first series of the year with 4 wide receivers on the field. It definitely shows where their priority is, and it is their strength. But we look at that defense, and we're talking with Justin Adams of CBS News Colorado, former CU tight end as well. The defensive adjustment, Robert Livingston is his first game as the defensive coordinator coming out from the Cincinnati Bengals as their D-backs coach to take this job. The defensive adjustment seemed very good, that they scored a touchdown at the end, North Dakota State did, but otherwise those were their only points of the half. And in the first half, they moved the ball more or less at will. When you look at those 2 halves, which one of those do you think is the real Buffs and that we'll see on Saturday?
I hope it's the Buffs we saw in the second half. I think it's a mixture of both, right? But because one of the things is that they played man coverage 70% in the game. Pro Football Focus, which I know people may have their issues with it. Trust me, there's some things out there that's kind of iffy, but they were right when they said 70% of that game defensively, they were playing man coverage. I don't care who you have. You can have the no-fly zone. If you're playing that much man coverage and you have man beaters, you're going to be able to find guys wide open. The biggest thing that was bothering to me wasn't really the passes to the outside, but it was covering the tight end. If you don't have the personnel to cover the tight ends, to cover the backs, right? You had your linebacker in the first drive beat on a Texas route. Those are the type of things that you can't have, and you give up a 62-yard pass because of that. You got to figure out the way to be able to slow those things down, especially on third down, and make sure that the tight end is not hurting you in the game. Another thing, too, is that if you play zone coverage, especially if you mix up coverages, you just want a young quarterback at Dilly Riley to just be able to make sure that he holds on the ball that extra second. Because if he holds on to that rock, just that extra moment, that extra pace, then it allows the pass rushers that you talked about a whole lot in the offseason to be able to go and get home. And look, Raiola is not like one of those guys who is fleet of foot. He'll stay in that pocket, and you'll be able to go and get after him. So those are the things you have to be able to do. I would love to see the Buffs to be able to be stout defensively in the run game to get things started and then go and apply that pressure. It all starts there. If you could really apply some pressure on this young man, even get up a couple of possessions, man, your defense will be able to go and get after this young quarterback. And even though he's at home, it's a big-time game, and he may fold under the pressure.
Yeah, pressure is an opportunity for the Buffaloes, who really would like to get to a bowl game this year, really almost need to get to a bowl game this year. And it's hard to see it if they don't get this win. So it's a big one for the Buffs. Let's turn our attention, Justin, to the Denver Broncos, who opened the season in Seattle. Bo Nix will start, the first rookie quarterback to start since John Elway back in 1983 for the Broncos to start game one. So that's obviously a rare occurrence, and he's the first rookie to be a team captain since 1967. This has to do, obviously, with 61 starts in the collegiate level, the experience, the age. He's an older rookie. A lot of the times people look at that as a negative, but in this case, especially for the Broncos, it's exactly what they need, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, especially when you look, let's not forget, there's still a huge cap hit on this team. Like, let's just get that out the way first, right? And we've all talked about this since 2017, that this team needed to hit the reset button. Well, guess what? You finally are able to hit that reset button. And we're here to see if this guy is going to be legit, if Bo Nix is going to be the guy of the future. But I put a little caveat on that, because oftentimes, if you compare Bo Nix's situation to, say, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix doesn't have the same type of weapons that a Caleb Williams has, right? He doesn't have Keenan Allen being the second wide receiver, Allen Robinson on the squad as well, right? He doesn't have those type of individuals, those type of pieces. Cortland Sutton is a really good wide receiver. He should have been a Pro Bowler last year, but he's not the tier of those guys, right? Hopefully he could be able to have a healthy tight end. That would be nice to be able to have that safety blanket. So it'd be very interesting to see how the offense will mold and how it would gel, especially under Sean Payton. But look, playing in Seattle, I don't care who you have at quarterback. That is an extremely difficult place to play. The running game is going to be huge, just to make sure that Bo Nix is comfortable with some short passes and allow that young man to cook in the second half.
The idea with Bo Nix being the center of obviously so much attention for the Broncos, and understandably so, sort of detracts a little bit from the defense. You lost Justin Simmons. Brandon Jones is expected to kind of pull that back together. Riley Moss may start opposite of Pat Surtain, who's the recipient of a big new contract. But the Broncos are assuming they're going to be able to get after the quarterback in waves, and that they have enough in the defensive backfield. How do you feel about that defense? Do you feel they actually have enough talent there, or is the fact that a lot of the talent still unproven a major concern that's probably getting a little bit underrated, given the fact that all the attention goes to Nix?
They'll have the one thing that could help out any team that doesn't have stars, except for Pat Surtain. They have enthusiasm. And that's the one thing that we saw all throughout training camp, is they have huge enthusiasm. Now, will that translate on game day? We're going to find out. Or as Gary Kubiak would say, we're fixing to find out, right? And that's one of the main things is that this team has the youth. They have that enthusiasm. We'll find out if these guys could be able to get to the quarterback. I would love to see Baron Browning have a couple of sacks as well in this game, right? Seattle's going to come out with a brand new system, brand new coach, brand new system, and they want to spread the ball out, especially with the type of pieces that they have. So it will give you those opportunities to get after Geno Smith. The biggest thing comes back to this is that you don't want to be in a position where you're turning over the football and you're down a couple of possessions, because that hurts your pass rushers. You got to go and get on top first as much as you can and allow your young guys to get after the quarterback.
if the Broncos come away with we know there'd be excitement after a win, but if they come away with a loss that's close, and this was a good game, and Bo Nix played a clean game, how bullish do you feel about the Broncos' chances? You know, that you can make of it what you will, but the over-under in Vegas is 5.5 wins. They got to 8 last year. How bullish would you be if they lost this game? But we're in it.
Well, you know, a lot of games in the NFL lost close anyway, right? You rarely see blowouts, right? 2-3 possession blowouts. You rarely see that in the NFL. My thing is this, is that what are your expectations? Like, that's the number one thing. What are your expectations for this team? If you're expecting this team, like NFL Network has, to be the 6th seed in the playoffs, well, then you will be very upset, because then this will be a game that I won't say you should win, but it is a winnable game. Seattle is a juggernaut, to say the least, right? If they were going up against the 49ers, that would be different, right? But this is one of those games where you'll say, look, if you have a good showing and you see some growth out of Bo Nix, if we see the same things that we saw in the preseason, then you can look and say, hey, this is a guy that we could slowly start to build around, right? I mean, even when you think about Justin Herbert, it really wasn't his first official start because he was coming in for Tyrod Taylor, right? But in his first time of getting some extended play time against the Chiefs, they didn't win that game, but you walked away knowing he's the guy. You had no question anymore about who's the guy. That's the same thing that I want to see from Bo Nix. We saw what we saw in the preseason, but we want to walk away from this game saying, okay, this is an individual that we could go and build around. And we know there's going to be those roller coasters of having that rookie quarterback, but you got to walk away from being in a tough environment by saying we could be able to win with this guy throughout the years.
We'll find out if that happens on Sunday. Of course, he is Justin Adams. So check him out on social at Justin Adams TV, and of course over at CBS News Colorado, where he's on top of everything and looking snappy like he does today up there. Justin, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Sean, you're the man. Go Buffs.
All right, thanks so much. We'll have a chance to talk to Justin over the course of the season. Always terrific to talk to a guy that local as could be, Montbello High School, University of Colorado, and now over at CBS News. So always great to talk to Justin. Give him a follow on social. Again, Justin Adams TV. And if you're looking for the perfect place to work, play, exercise, and socialize, well, you don't have to look any further than the Denver Athletic Club, right in the heart of downtown Denver. It's been there for more than a century, and for good reason. As a DAC member, you'll enjoy top-notch amenities like a full fitness center, licensed childcare center, a spa, massage, Pilates, a golf simulator, and more. It's not just a place to go work out, but what truly sets the DAC apart is that vibrant member-owned community. Like I talked about, for 100 years, it's been the heart of the city, and that's because it puts its members first. The member-owned club is all about you, offering year-round social events, co-working, dining, fun for the entire family. The Denver Athletic Club is truly a club for your whole life. And join the DAC today. It's very, very easy, and you check it all out at denverathleticClub.cc for all the details and see what's made it at the heart of the city for more than 100 years. Nate, we talked a little bit with Justin Adams while he was on here about the Broncos getting after Geno Smith, potentially. Baron Browning, part of that. Baron Browning, a free agent after this year, as is Jonathan Cooper. The Broncos are looking to get the sacks done probably by committee. And it's funny we talk about Seattle because at the risk of going back to Broncos fans at Super Bowl 48 with the famed NASCAR package that Seattle would roll out, they literally bring in new guys and rotate and keep them fresh. The Broncos, here we are all those years later, kind of trying to do the same thing with Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning, Nick Bonito, rookie Jonah Ellis, and then on the defensive line, pardon me, both Zach Allen and newcomer John Franklin Myers. We've seen teams do it with success, but the teams that have done it with success have generally had guys with a little more of a track record of production. The Broncos seem to be long on promise. Production thus far really hasn't been there. Even Franklin Myers, the newcomer, still only has 19.5 sacks in his career.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you've got to be careful of if you start to put some pressure on Geno Smith is if you look, for example, at his statistics from last season, you're talking about a quarterback that was number 7 in the NFL, according to Player Profiler, in terms of completion percentage when under pressure. So what you need to make sure of is obviously you want to try to get to him because you always want to try to get to the quarterback. That's, I just had a John Maddenism right here. You always want to try to get to the quarterback. But in the case of Geno Smith, one of the things that he has shown, in particular last season with Seattle, is a propensity to still complete his passes when he's under pressure. So if you're not careful in terms of how you try to collapse that pocket, or if you wind up putting too much on the second or the third layer of the defense. It's been shown, at least statistically last season, that Geno Smith can make you pay for that. And so you're right. There's two parts of this conversation. Yes, there's the idea of trying to figure out where some of that pass pressure and potential, pass deflections, pressures, sacks, et cetera, are going to come from. But it's also flipping that around and saying, wait a minute, this is a Seattle team that is playing at home, a hostile environment with a quarterback that's proven that if you try to get to him, he can find a way to play smart and make you pay for it. So it's one of those things that I think that there's something to be said for trying to get to him, Sean, but I also want to be careful that you don't, go all out, that you don't suddenly become Wade Phillips, see ball, get ball,
Right.
and that you pay for it on the secondary, because that's not the no-fly zone back there.
No, it is not. And you're talking about some pretty good receivers, obviously. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, who's questionable for the game. Jackson Smith and Jigba is also in there as well, and they like his promise. And old friend Noah Fant at tight end would easily be the most productive one on the Broncos by a mile right now. He is currently questionable for the game as well, but at least the latest report expected to play. So you have to be careful with that. But even zooming out past this game, and it's a good thing you pointed that out, because I think people look at Geno Smith and look at his sort of late career renaissance and think, well, he's still just a guy.
Right.
Not really. He's actually he's aged like fine wine here. He's gotten smarter. He's gotten better. His release has gotten quicker. He's become a pretty effective quarterback. And that's one of the reasons that the Seahawks decided to keep him and move on instead of trying to change their fortunes in the draft. But zooming out on the season a little bit for the Broncos, with the idea that some combination of Cooper, who led the team in sacks, Benito, who was second on the sack and by only half sack, but with a much, much smaller percentage of the snap counts,
right.
Does one of these guys has to absolutely break out and become a consistent threat? Or can you really look at Browning, Benito, Ellis, and Cooper and just say, you know what, we'll just keep rotating in the fresh guys and that'll do enough?
I'd like to think that maybe you can find a way to be able to do both. And I know that's sort of dodging your question. But what I mean by that is I think you need somebody that can be a consistent threat. But at the same time, the best defenses, in my opinion, are ones that even if you decide to pay attention to a particular player, if you're the offensive line coach and you're trying to protect your quarterback, that somebody else steps in and suddenly becomes the problem. Right. I mean, it kind of is similar to what we've talked about of finding the right person to line up opposite Pat Surtain. I think you can have the same thing when it comes to pressuring the quarterback. Like, it's one thing to have a TJ Watt or a JJ Watt or anybody with the last name Watt, apparently, to put some pressure on the quarterback. But it's also not a bad thing if that is spread across that defensive front to the point where you have just enough talent at these positions that it doesn't have to be at the TJ Watt type of level. You can have just enough talent across the board that it may allow you to scheme some things, and it may give Vance Joseph some opportunities to get creative and bring pressure from places that maybe the quarterback doesn't see coming. And that's what you've got to hope for. So would I like to see Alex Singleton and Benito, and would I like to see these guys break out and suddenly become the guys that put the kind of pressure on the quarterback that we haven't seen since Von Miller? Of course I would. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind having, Sean, having a bunch of B level guys than necessarily an A+ and then some C+.
I think if you look at the end of the year and you have 4 Broncos with 8 or more sacks, then I imagine you probably put enough pressure on the team, even if you don't have a guy that's got big numbers and double-digit sacks like the Pro Bowlers have. I think that's probably enough to make things work. And that's probably going to be what you're going to get, because, look, there's no Von Miller here. As I mentioned, Franklin Myers has 19.5 career sacks. Zach Allen on the line has 16.5. Yeah. DJ Jones has 11, and then because of his year last year, Jonathan Cooper has 13 in that linebacking room. So, I mean, those are the guys that just have double-digit sacks over the course of their career. So to expect one of these guys to blow up and all of a sudden, Jonathan Cooper, who led the team last year, go from 13 career sacks to 13 this year simply isn't realistic. But maybe you can get it done piecemeal. The other trick, we talked about it yesterday, where sacks aren't necessarily the be-all, end-all. Pressures are better. Sacks cause punts. Pressures cause turnovers. So those stats aren't in there. The pressure is important. But the other part of this is that you don't have the luxury with all of these guys when they're on the field to have them all just go after the quarterback, pin their ears back and go chase them. They have to be also aware that you still may need to cover the flats. There could be a running back out there. There could be a tight end that slips through. All the different ways in which you also have to pay attention to the defense. You can't just go after the quarterback. And when you talk about those elite guys like a Von Miller during his prime, Von Miller sort of got a bad rap for not being effective in all phases of the game, but that's not really true. He was a very effective linebacker, and it's one of the reasons he'll be in the Hall of Fame. Could he have been better in pass coverage? I suppose, but that's not really what he was out there to do. But he was a pretty sound tackler. He was stout against the run. You need guys who can do that as well. I think in Cooper's case, I think you've seen that. I think in Browning's case, I think you've seen that. In Benito, I think you see a lot of upside in rushing the quarterback. The facility to do everything else, I think, is still up in the air. Jonah Ellis is a high motor guy coming out of Utah, looks to be pretty strong as well. But again, all these unproven guys. So this is another one of those things with the Broncos where we talk about this rebuild that's happening. That what you're seeing in a lot of ways is the Broncos putting the pieces together. They're assembling the race car, right? And now they've got a lot of parts on it they didn't have before. But you need to see which ones actually work well and which ones still need swapped out. They don't have everything they need to be effective. And I think this team can be serviceable getting after the quarterback, but I don't think the Broncos are going to terrorize quarterbacks all year long, no matter the kind of talent they have. You need to find guys who can get after the quarterback and not make the mistakes that also can cost you big plays that lead to first downs.
Yeah, you don't want to do something that leaves the guys behind you high and dry. You certainly don't want to do that. And that's, like I said, without the no-fly zone, you can't necessarily do the see ball, get ball type of defense out of the front side.
And they have to kind of find those guys.
Sure they do.
You don't really, like I said,
Absolutely.
I think Cooper has probably shown it. Browning has shown, obviously, the ability to do a little bit of both. But until you see a guy that can rush the passers, consistently get pressure, and do everything they need to do for their responsibilities as a linebacker, I know we call them edge rushers in some cases now around here, but they have linebacker roles still. And that's part of it. So this is still a little bit like the wide receiver room that we've talked about. The Broncos have to find out what they've got, and they don't necessarily know until they get out there and play on the field. And that's another one of these questions. And one of the reasons why the Broncos on the whole, when you look at their playoff chances, look really spotty, because the teams that are you likely to get into the teams that don't have that many holes, don't have that many gaps, or at least know what they have. You go back to the old Bill Belichick that he said, if you have a guy from 1 to 10 and he's a 10 one week and a 3 the other week, give me a team full of 6s. I at least know what I'm getting every week and I can work around that. The Broncos still, even though they're building this roster in the form that Sean Payton wants it to look, they still don't know what it's going to look like until they actually get on the field. And that will start this Sunday.
Yeah, it really will. And we're going to find out a lot. I mean, that's kind of what I'm excited about the season getting started, aside from just the fact that the season is getting started. I'm excited about the idea of getting a chance to see, to find, if you will, the answer to some of these questions.
Yeah.
That we've been asking ourselves over and over and over again for what seems like a decade.
Well, it's mostly has
kind of what it's felt like.
Point, yeah.
But yeah, that I'm right there with you. Sunday's going to answer a lot for us. That's for sure.
Well, you look at the situation here for the Broncos, and when you're looking at the opportunity to look at this over under a 5.5 for the year in betting, we have options for you over at Mile High Sports as well to make things easy.
Yeah, we sure do. And it's because we put everything together in one page. That's what we did. I mentioned this yesterday on the show. When sports betting became legalized in May of 2020, we decided that we were going to remain Switzerland, and that we were going to take this opportunity to partner with just about everybody when it comes to finding the right bonuses, finding the right opportunities for you as a sports bettor for signing up with some of these folks. And so we know you may have a favorite app. You may have more than one favorite app on your phone. Folks, I've got 7. So what we did is, if you're looking for those sign-up bonuses and some of the best bonuses and different opportunities that you're going to find with the books, you're finding right now as we lead into week 1 of the football season. And so if you're looking for that, go to our website, milehighsports.com, and check out the Colorado Online Sports Betting page. In doing so, you will find all the different options, all the different books, and all the different offers that they have. And then you can choose the one that makes the most sense for you. Whether that is what Fanatics is doing right now with their bonuses, as well as the jersey drop, whether it is some of the matching bonuses, the no sweat things that they do, all of that. You're going to find them all there. Pick the one that makes the most sense for you. If you've decided you want to add an app, it's one of the things we're going to talk about when it comes to sports betting throughout the season. is I shop around a lot. It's why I have all those apps on my phone, is because the differences you can find in what the payouts are vary from book to book. So it's great to have a favorite, but it's also good to make sure that you're paying attention to where the value is. And sometimes you can find some tremendous value across the board. So make sure you're doing that. Go check it out. We got all the information for you. We've done the legwork. You go to that one page, boom, you find out exactly what is there. You click on those. By clicking on those, by the way, you're doing us a favor because it lets the books know that you came from Mile High Sports. And that is how we get our compensation for it. So do us a favor. I know you see stuff on social media all the time. Go to our page, use our page, sign up for the book that makes the most sense for you, milehighsports.com.
Yep, easy to get to on the app or milehighsports.com. Just click Colorado Sports Betting and it's all there for you. And you might want to do it today because the NFL gets underway tonight. The Chiefs and the Ravens kick it off. I mean, a game that would be, I think if it was, you put it on the schedule anywhere, game of the year type potential right out of the gate for the NFL, with the two favorites in the AFC and probably the two favorites for the MVP as well in Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. And Nate, of course, there are lots of different ways to look at this. I know that we look at this game from a bunch of different perspectives, but you have a couple of things that you think is going to happen in this.
Yeah, I do. And I want to take a look at some of the bets that are out there for you. And a reminder that you can always find myself and our good friend Brad Evans on the Fade 5 podcast. He and I do that 3 times a week now that we are into football season and we get you ready for Thursday night football. Tomorrow we'll be getting you ready for the weekend, but obviously there's also the Friday night game that is taking place. And then, of course, on Monday we do that for you as well. And you can also find that stuff posted up at Brad's website, thegamingjuice.com. But let's talk about some of the bets that I like for this evening. And one of the things that I wanted to be able to show you guys as we get into this for today is, and Danny, I'm going to pop this up on the screen for everybody. This is the splits that you see right now. This is courtesy of our friend John Ewing over at BetMGM, who shares these stats with us. This is where the money and where the tickets are so far this evening. So you can see that this is a game that opened up with the Chiefs favored by 2.5. That has gone and expanded out to a flat 3 at this point, and 55% of the money is on that right now for folks. The total, that 46-47, there's so many NFL games that fall into that total, folks, the 46 or the 47. And you can see a lot of folks believe that this is going to wind up being the under. I will tell you that if you want to play something like that and you want to play the under, I would make it a part of a same game parlay if I were you, and I would take that number up. Because you never know when something's going to sneak in there. But check out the fact that when it comes to the folks that are actually choosing to bet on the money line, it is leaning toward the Ravens as opposed to the Chiefs. I'm not necessarily buying that. I do like the Ravens with the points, although I will tell you, as our friend Brad Evans did earlier today, that one of the ways that I think that you can do that is to actually take the spread, bump it up for Baltimore, take them to say 6-7 maybe instead of the 3, and then take that total and bump it up from that 47 number, get it up into the low 50s, and then play the under. If I were doing it, that is how I would stack it. I have chosen to do something different when it comes to the same game parlays. But as we start, Sean, before I get into some of the player props and things that I like, want to get your feedback on that spread and that over under. What are you, because again, these are two great AFC teams. So before I dive into some of the player props that I want you guys to pay attention to for this evening and maybe decide to put some dollars on, let me know just from a game perspective, where are you at for tonight?
3 points sounds right. I mean, I think these are two very, very good teams. Lamar Jackson apparently, has put on some weight, ready for a little more wear and tear of the season. We know the Chiefs, obviously, everything you need to know about the Chiefs. They're extraordinarily good. They're extraordinarily talented. I'm curious to see how they use rookie Xavier Worthy. That may be part of the equation too. Juju Smith-Schuster returns, who had a pretty good year and rapport with Patrick Mahomes. So I actually look at the Chiefs receiving core this year and think they're quite a bit better than last year. That's a scary thought. You gave Mahomes more weapons and Travis Kelce is still there. But, if you're looking at the straight up bets, Nate, money line bets, for example, when she's in the building,
Oh, don't.
When Taylor Swift has been in the building, the Chiefs are 10-3.
Yeah, I don't.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
I don't. Here's what's really funny about it.
Maybe like betting too, Nate.
I'm not as bothered by it as some people are.
I couldn't care less.
I don't give a crap. If the NFL wants to use her to promote the sport, go for it. You're not offending me as a fan. And if you're offended by it, man, you've got issues.
Yeah. More football fans is more fun.
Now, that said, I'm sure as heck not going to pay attention to the over-unders based on whether she's within a 25-mile rate. No, I don't care.
Patrick Mahomes said that in the offseason she worked on some plays.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And Travis Kelce in an interview said that he hadn't run them past Andy Reid yet. They're just having fun with this, folks, and they're you
can do that when you've won 2 straight Super Bowls.
Yeah, it just let them have fun with it. So no, I'm not paying attention to any of it. Brad will tell you that his favorite plus odds bet for tonight is for Travis Kelce to have an anytime touchdown. If you want to roll with that one,
I love that. Obviously,
if you want to roll with that one, you can. I'll give you one that Brad and I talked about on the pod here, coming up in just a minute. But let me roll with you here on a couple of player props that I like. Let me start off with a name that you guys are all very familiar with. Let me talk about Derrick Henry. This is an alt total that you can find over at DraftKings, folks. I took his total for his rushing up to 70 yards, and I'm playing the over. Couple of reasons I'm doing that. First and foremost, it got me up into plus odds.
Heck yeah.
And it's not a huge difference from what his standard line is. So I'm bumping him up to a flat 70, and I just need him to get 70 or more. Part of the reason that I like that is because, look, Baltimore went out and got Derrick Henry away from the Titans for a reason. But he's got 4 games in his career that he has played against the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's averaged almost 112 yards on the ground per game. So he's averaged triple digits when he has played the Chiefs. Yes, I know that was with the Titans. It's different with Baltimore. Lamar Jackson might decide to run it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Derrick Henry will find a way, I think, to get it done. And I think him getting to 70 yards is relatively simple for him to be able to do. Now, let me give you a name that you might not be thinking about, and that's Justin Watson, wide receiver here. I'm going to take the over on 13.5 receiving yards. Yes, as you can see on the screen, I'm paying some extra juice at that minus 120 over at BetMGM. But the reason I'm doing that is because at some of the other books, his number is at 14.5 or 15.5. So I'm paying some juice, but I'm doing so to get a lower number at BetMGM. Flat out, that's what I'm doing. This has to do with ball distribution and why I think Watson is capable of doing it. Frankly, he's capable of doing it with 1 catch, which is the other reason I like it. If you go back and look at a lot of his receptions totals in terms of yards per reception, he's had a lot of games where his average is above this number. So he could get 1 catch and do this. This might be a one and done prop. Do I hope he gets 2 just to give us a little bit of a cushion? Of course I do. But I do really like that one in terms of Justin Watson and his total and where I think he can go from a receiving standpoint. But Sean, before we get into a couple of the other ones, I was just talking about Justin Watson here for a second. Rashee Rice is a really popular name tonight. Yep. Zay Flowers is a really popular name tonight. Obviously, Travis Kelce is, Mark Andrews is, Isaiah Likely is. There are some great receiving options across this team. So I brought up Justin Watson because I'm kind of, I'm doing a deep dive here, right? I'm tucking behind the curtain and trying to find something different. Outside of whoever might actually be on your fantasy roster, because we know we're rooting for that. Is there somebody that you zoned in on from a player prop standpoint for tonight before I get into? I've got a great SGP for us tonight.
Basically just there's an even money one. It's a plus 100, so even money. You get your money back if you bet it. Isaiah Pacheco with an anytime touchdown. I think there are a lot of different ways. They use him in the passing game. They use him in the running game. We know that unlike the Ravens, Patrick Mahomes is not running unless he has to. And yes, he's going to look for Kelce first, but Pacheco's kind of speed power combination is special for an anytime touchdown for even money. I like that one. I think that's pretty good. And of course, Kelce's a plus 110. So if you think that he's going to score as well, that's also a really good fit. So there are some touchdown options that are good. Mark Andrews is at a plus 160. We know that when they get near the red zone, that Lamar Jackson looks Andrews' way.
Yeah, I think that he does. Here's the one thing I'm going to point out for you, though. If you're thinking about Likely, you're thinking about Andrews, or you're thinking about Kelce. And I know Kelce's a different egg when it comes to his popularity from a touchdown standpoint.
Taylor's in the building.
Stop it. But here's the one thing that I will say. If you go back to last year, across the entire season, these two teams combined only allowed 8 touchdowns to the tight end position. Combined.
Yeah.
So they do manage to, from a defensive standpoint, they do manage to shut down the tight end. Danny, if you've got that graphic for the same game parlay, go ahead and pop that one up there for me. I always like these because a lot of times when we are getting ready for a game like this, same game parlays become really popular with the books because a lot of times they will give you some boosts. They might give you like a no sweat type of thing, like, hey, bet $10, and if it doesn't hit, then you get your $10 back, right? So here's one that I put together that's entirely receptions, as you can see. Let's talk about the aforementioned Isaiah Pacheco that Sean just pointed out. They use him in the passing game. They use him on the ground. I need 2 catches out of him. The rookie sensation that everybody was high on for their fantasy drafts, Xavier Worthy. I just need him to have 2 catches. I think he's likely to get 3 or 4, but I'm going to take him just for 2 in purposes of putting this one together. Rashee Rice for 3 or more. He may have 5 or 6, folks. And the same thing with Zay Flowers. So what I've done is I've taken low thresholds on each of these guys. Pacheco for 2, Worthy for 2, Rice for 3, Flowers for 4. And you can see up there at the top, the payday on that 4-legger over at FanDuel, that's where I built this one, is a plus 125. Sean, if you had to pick one of those legs that's going to hose you, which one is it? Pacheco, Worthy, Rice, or Flowers? I was like, Brad and I do this all the time. Like, pick the one leg that's going to hose me.
I think it's Worthy.
You think it's Worthy? Okay.
In his NFL debut, I think Worthy would be the one that's the biggest risk.
I think
the Pacheco one is automatic.
I throw that out there, folks. If you're new to some of the You Bet Tonight and some of the betting stuff that I do, one of the things that I would suggest that you do is go follow me over on Twitter. Like I said, I never call it X. Go follow me over there on Twitter, and you will see in my profile, it's pinned right to the top. I keep a spreadsheet. Brad and I are completely transparent with the bets that we do. Nothing is behind a paywall. We don't make you subscribe to squat. Okay. Everything that we do is posted and it's on a spreadsheet. So if you go follow me on Twitter at Nate Lundy, you will see that spreadsheet there. You will be able to track my picks throughout the year. So if you're not watching when we're doing the betting segment here on the show, you can still find my picks. You'll see them. Like I said, completely transparent, posted up on the website. And before we close out the segment, Sean, I know one of the things that you wanted to point out, because we were talking about it in the notes, is it the most bet team to make the playoffs?
It's not who you expect around the whole NFL.
It's the Broncos.
It's the Broncos.
Y'all are high.
Yeah, we're gonna try to.
You ain't got no job.
We're gonna try to make sure we talk you down from
high.
that ladder, because that number is remarkable, but it speaks to a little bit of Broncos fandom.
Holy cow, you people are nuts.
Yeah, but you can't afford to do anything like that when you're talking about your mortgage, especially if you're self-employed. Obviously, that's challenging when you're trying to get a home when you're self-employed, and or refinance, and all those things could be difficult. And it's tricky because you have to get a bunch of different hoops you're gonna have to jump through. But we have the folks who can help you. If you're self-employed and having trouble getting a home loan, reach out and talk to our friends at SCL Mortgage. SCL's helped thousands of self-employed people refinance their mortgage or buy a home with their bank statement loan. No tax returns needed, because SCL understands the challenges of being self-employed. They've been serving Colorado successfully for 23 years. So you can call them at 303-790-2222. That's 303-790-2222, or visit them at myspecialmortgage.com. So if you're self-employed and you're looking to refinance or to find a new home loan, call the people who know how to help you, because this is what they do. If you're self-employed, you want your home, you need to talk to our friends at SCL Mortgage. That is myspecialmortgage.com, or 303-790-2222. That's NMLS number 1200716. And Nate, you are exactly right. Over at BetMGM today, and this was jarring to me because I wasn't even really concerned about betting per se. This is more about where Broncos fans' heads are at, right? Mm-hmm. And where they're putting their money, literally where their mouth is.
Just nuts.
Obviously, most of the books have a bet just team to make the playoffs. For the Denver Broncos over at BetMGM, it's plus 450. Mm-hmm. The Broncos, 97% of those bets. And by the way, casinos like to put that number, so it's about 50-50 on both sides. That's what they're trying to do with those numbers. 97% of those bets, Nate, are for the Broncos to make the playoffs at the plus 450. That is the most of any NFL team. They're the most bet on team to make the playoffs. And I am absolutely baffled. Instead of throwing your money away, I will start a GoFundMe or put my Venmo up on the screen or something. I'll be happy to take that.
What are y'all doing?
97% of Broncos fans think they're going to make the playoffs.
What are you doing?
Playoffs?
What I don't
do more of this thing.
I don't like to flush my money down the toilet. I mean, I like to spend it on things like a vacation.
Well, they're spending it on something.
Beer.
Anything?
But y'all are smoking the orange and blue silly grass right now.
Get a new TV to watch the Broncos on or something.
Look, I'm a fan. I hope I'm wrong, but I've told you before, I don't see the path. I don't see it in a stacked, and I mean stacked AFC.
Historically, especially at the quarterback position.
Ridiculous AFC.
Yeah, it fascinates
like I'm telling you, you could take Like I've told you, actually, I think the Jets are completely overhyped right now.
Oh yeah,
I think their defense is really good. I'm not buying the rest of it. And let's say take the top 10 teams in the AFC, and let's say a couple of them fall on their face. That still doesn't leave room for Denver.
No.
So I don't know where the hell these people are getting.
You had a
this
person
from.
on NFL Network say that the Broncos would be a surprise playoff team, and we know that every year, like historically over the last roughly 20 years, there's been 4 new teams make the playoffs every year. But that is we've just gone over at this show, Nate. We don't.
By the way, if you want to bet against the Jets to make the playoffs, it's plus money. I just want to throw that out there real quick.
I don't hate that.
It's plus money for them to miss the playoffs. The number one bet on team to miss the playoffs, by the way, is the Bears.
To miss
the playoffs is the Bears.
They're way more likely to make the playoffs in the NFC than the Broncos.
The second most bet team to miss the playoffs is the Chargers, and I don't hate that bet.
I don't hate that one.
I don't hate that bet at all.
If there's a team that would surprise if they miss the playoffs, that you think that might happen, who is it?
The team that would surprise me to miss the playoffs right now in the AFC is Houston, because I believe the AFC South is theirs for the taking.
Okay.
I think Jacksonville should give them a little bit of a push. I think that the AFC South in some of the games is going to beat up on each other, but I do believe that Houston is the best team in the AFC South, top to bottom. And so with that in mind, I think that if Houston were to miss the playoffs, I would be very, very surprised.
Obviously, I mean, I feel that way about the Chiefs because I think they'll be the only team in that.
Well, yeah, I'm not talking.
But I'll give you a team that I think everyone thinks will make the playoffs. That actually, I think could miss it, and I think would surprise. I think there are a couple. I think the Bengals are a team that if healthy all year, they should make it. I think they could miss it.
If Burrow looks like Burrow from the Super Bowl,
they should make
it. They'll be fine.
But if they can't protect him, I think they'll miss.
I mean, Jamar Chase has shown up for practice the last 2 days.
Yeah, they must be getting close to getting paid for whatever they're doing over there. But I'll give you a bit of a sleeper. One of these teams that a lot of people feel really confident is going to make the playoffs. That might not, and that might be the Dallas Cowboys. I could see the Cowboys with their running back situation is ugly. Obviously, they're in a division where not every team there is particularly good. But if the Cowboys missed because of Bears or a Packers or some of those teams, one of those teams or Falcons bubbles up. Some of those teams we think are possible. I could see that come at the Cowboys' expense.
Yeah, I mean, 3 straight years of being 12-5. Isn't that it? I think it's 3. Right. I think it's 3 in a row that they've been 12-5.
And then don't ask what happens afterwards.
Yeah, Cowboys fans don't want to talk. Yeah, Cowboys fans don't want to talk about what happens with game 18, or 19 for that matter. But I think that I think that's a double-digit win team. But again, it's because the NFC is a little softer than what we see in the AFC. So I agree with you. I would be surprised if they didn't, just based on what they've done the last 3 years. They obviously brought Zeke Elliott back to go along with Rico Dowdle and others in that backfield. I do think their running back situation is a little bit strange.
They added Dalvin Cook to the practice squad, and Cook believes he's got a little something left.
Dalvin's like 112 in football years.
Years.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Dalvin would be playing on the what do they call it? It's not the senior tour anymore. What's it called in the PGA? Champions Tour.
Champions Tour.
Dalvin Cook is on the Champions Tour right now.
And Dallas may need him anyway. I mean, it's interesting.
It's like I said, I'm just I would be surprised if they didn't make it. I would agree. But in totality across the board, I think the one that would surprise me the most is, first of all, like Niners or something. I'm trying to pick somebody that I think is sort of middle of the road, that you might actually be able to find some value on. I really do. The one that would surprise me is Houston. But look, a lot of that's going to be on CJ Stroud. He gave us a lot of flash,
and that's what happens every time we talk about this. And keep this in mind with Bo Nix. In any sport, at any time, whether it's baseball, football, you name it, if you can play as a rookie, it shows up and you can tell. We could tell that CJ Stroud can play. He can play. We know that. But the second year is when the league now adjusts to you. Now they know. Now they saw enough. There's enough on video. They can react. The question is, do you adjust to the adjustments? Do you succeed? Do you still make that leap and look like you're ascending? So for Stroud, I think that question is still out. I mean, I'm very, very bullish on him, but we'll see, because anytime guys pop out like that and they have a great year, And then the next year comes around, the league's seen them, and you can have a regression. That's pretty normal. And it wouldn't surprise me if Stroud regressed a little bit this year. He's not going to surprise anybody. The Texans are not going to surprise anybody. But you'll have to see if he can still play. And keep that in mind, even with the Broncos this year, and I know all 97% of you are betting on them to make the playoffs for reasons I cannot comprehend. But even if Bo Nix looks really good, remember, it's not an immediate process. He can look good this year and say, yep, that's our guy. And then you have to still fight through that second year when they've seen you. So some of those things are worth keeping in mind as well. But I look at that with the Broncos, and I understand the reasons for optimism. Heck, we're optimistic, but we're optimistic with a level, Nate. The Broncos finally seem to have a direction.
I'm optimistic.
They're comfortable with their quarterback. We talked about the running back room. They definitely need tight ends. That there's a lot to like about what the Broncos are doing. But to assume that they are going to jump to the playoffs this year in that AFC with a rookie quarterback, as we talked about, Nix is going to be the first Broncos rookie quarterback to start game one since John Elway. And I think even Bo Nix would tell you he's not John Elway. The assumption that the Broncos are going to make a leap to the playoffs this year is silly. And I hope I'm wrong. I'm born and raised in Colorado. That's the first team I've ever watched. But in this case, every year, I think Broncos fans talk themselves into something. This one is more real. This is the most interesting team that the Broncos have had since the 2016 team that followed the Super Bowl 50 win. But it doesn't mean they're a playoff team. It just means they're going in the right direction. And hopefully, as you mentioned yesterday, Nate, they will be entertaining, and I think they will.
I think they'll be entertaining. I think the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that I'm optimistic on a calendar. I'm not optimistic like right this instant. I'm optimistic with how this is going to play out in total. And remember that when it comes to making the playoffs, again, it's much like we've talked about it with the AFC West and with other divisions for that matter. You can get better as a team, but you don't do that in a vacuum. Everybody around you can get better as well. Mm-hmm. Here's a good example, folks. If we want to go back to the AFC and talk about some of the numbers that we got from BetMGM. Right now, if you pay attention to the numbers, BetMGM is telling you that 3 teams from the AFC East are going to make the playoffs. All of them have minus 150 or higher odds.
Bills, Dolphins, and Jets.
Bills, Dolphins, Jets. Now, I've told you I'm not buying into the Jets for me personally. But if you follow the odds makers for a second, 3 of the 7 teams are coming out of that division. That means there's, let's see. Oh, yeah, 3 other teams because you got to take care of the division winners, right? Which leaves room for 1.
Well, and then
am I doing the math right here, folks?
Think about these divisions. Look at the AFC North. 3 of those teams made the playoffs last year.
Yes.
And the team that didn't was the Bengals, who are one of the AFC's favorites now that Joe Burrow is healthy again. So, I mean, you think if Burrow's healthy, the Broncos are going to catch the Bengals? 3 teams made there. Cleveland won 11 games last year.
I don't think they're doing that this year.
I don't either. But when you look at the teams you have to leap, the teams the Broncos were behind, that they would be better at. Jacksonville missed. They should be better. Indianapolis missed. They should be better. They were better than the Broncos in standings anyway. The Bengals, without Burrow for most of the year, still won 9 games. Mm-hmm. Which one of those are the Broncos going to jump over? And they didn't even make it. So even if 3 teams drop out, even if Cleveland doesn't make it and Miami, let's say, doesn't make it, well, some of these other teams are poised to jump in there.
If you think you're going to cash that ticket on the Broncos making the playoffs, you need 3 teams to falter. 3, not 1, not 2, not 2. 3 teams have to falter for you to even remotely have a chance. And that's also assuming, by the way, that you can find a way to win, which I've already told you, if they can go 500 at home, 4-4. I think they can win 1 game on the road. I can't find 2.
Well,
I can't.
If you're even imagining this team will make the playoffs, they have to win on Sunday.
Yes.
They have to. You
have to prove me wrong when it comes to the road game.
They have to win on Sunday.
I told you, 17 games are on the schedule. The Broncos are only favored in 2.
And they're on the road for 9 of them. They get the bad break this year.
Like I said,
the Broncos can be better. We've been talking about this.
Why don't you hand me $100? Let me kick you in the jewels, and we'll call it good.
Goodness, I'll do it. We'll kick you. So, I mean, you got options.
It's the same feeling.
But just you can get it over faster. With Nate, because you have to wait the whole season in this case. But for the Broncos, that's what we've been trying to let you know, that they can be better this year. And I think they will be better this year and still not be better in the standings. And that's exactly because of what Nate said. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. The other teams around you will also improve. Yes, will some drop off? They will. But right now, the AFC is historically stacked with all-star, all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber quarterbacks. And this is more of a quarterback league than it's ever been. The Broncos think they have a guy that can make them competitive in that. And I think they do too. But at the same time, as a rookie with this team, with this roster, Justin Adams, we had on earlier, brought up the fact that still this year, there's a big hit on the salary cap.
Yeah.
So you're not playing on that level playing field. That's your own doing, Broncos. So you can't
that was part of the rebuild.
That. But yeah, it's the Broncos. Just because they're not saying they're rebuilding, folks, doesn't mean they're not rebuilding. They are rebuilding. The good news is they seem to be doing it in the proper manner. And it seems to all have one direction, from ownership to general management to coaching to players. Everybody's finally pulling on the same end of the rope. But to expect it to happen immediately is foolish. What you're looking for is progress, and it will be incremental. It can be in a game the Broncos lose on Sunday, but Bo Nix doesn't turn the ball over and looks pretty sharp. It can be in a loss on Sunday, but Baron Browning breaks out and looks like a star, or Riley Moss looks like he can handle things opposite Pat Surtain. It will be incremental insofar as Audric Estime looks like a real goal line threat and a power back that can help going forward. That Devon Vele or Troy Franklin has a game where there looks like there's promise. These will be incremental steps. It's not going to be a quantum leap for teams. Teams think that will happen, and it usually doesn't happen no matter who they get, whether they draft a quarterback, whether they get a guy back like Aaron Rodgers, whether they trade for one. It doesn't happen like that. Don't fall for the same mistake the Broncos themselves made when they traded for Russell Wilson, thinking that one person will flip the entire futures of the team. It just doesn't happen that way. 53 guys on an active roster. You need all of them, and the Broncos still are building that from the floor up.
And by the way, if you haven't been paying attention, I don't think Russell Wilson practiced today. He's got tightness in his calf.
Well, don't worry about that.
There.
We'll worry about that in another week.
Justin Fields is going to be starting for that team by week 4.
By the way, the two quarterbacks who held onto the ball the longest last year in the NFL, on average, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And that's something in today's NFL that you don't want. And it's one of the reasons that Bo Nix is the quarterback and not Russell Wilson. Quick release. Real
football tonight.
NFL football tonight. And guess what? You get it on Friday night as well and Sunday. Nate gave you all those. The beauty of having this right here on YouTube is if you missed any of what Nate did, you just take that little thing and drag it back and hit pause, and you can check out everything that Nate was telling you to try out tonight if you're going to jump into the betting world. Can't wait to see the Ravens and the Chiefs.
Chiefsaholic is going to prison.
The Chiefs, obviously, when you're
17 and a half years in prison with no parole.
Yikes. The Chiefs themselves going for a
in
case you didn't. It's a good morning. Thanks to Danny. He makes everything work. Justin Adams from PBS News joining us as well. Appreciate that. Obviously, on a Football Friday tomorrow, we'll have a really big show tomorrow with Troy Rank of the Denver Post will join us. We'll have Dan Mormon breaking down the latest in preps. That's right. We do what the others don't. We'll talk about high school football as well. Every team, every day. That's what we do right here. He's Nate Lundy. I'm Sean Drotar. You're in the right spot. This is Mile High Sports.